Hey, what is going on, everybody? It's me, Uriel here, and today, this is my W204 C350. And as you can see, I am drenched in the rain. I'm not gonna stop because I love doing this stuff and I'm gonna keep doing it. So now in 2023, there's a lot of people asking, is the W204 C350 worth it in 2023? In my honest opinion, absolutely. Sure, it doesn't have the radar cruise control or the fancy Apple CarPlay that everybody talks about. I think it's still worth it. Now, I've divided this video in two different categories, pros and cons, to make it simple and easy to understand. Now let's go ahead and start with the pros. Number one biggest thing that I really love about this car is definitely the styling. Sure, there's a W205 and then now the new W206, but in my opinion, this car has just the right amount of styling. I think the biggest recognizable part of this car is the wheel arches and the angular sides and skirts and whatnot, because it really just, it screams Mercedes in a very muscular way. I think this is one of the first modern look that now you can recognize that it's a Mercedes. I prefer this design over the W205 or the W206 in my opinion, because those feel like bubbly, you know, they're very smooth and there's nothing wrong with that, but I just like how timeless this car looks. And especially the facelifted version, that one even looks better. Let's talk about comfortability. Comfortability on this car is a no-brainer. I mean, it's a Mercedes, right? Sure, the C350 has the sport suspension and whatnot, but in my opinion, even if it has a sport suspension, which is a lot stiffer than the regular, it still is very comfortable. And especially with the Michelin Pilot Sport tires, you really cannot ask for more. This car is just the right amount of comfortability, and you don't have to worry about aromatic suspension going bad. It's just good old regular suspension that is very smooth and comfortable. Reliability. Reliability and Mercedes nowadays are really not mixed into the same sentence. I agree with that. Now with the new ECUs, computers and whatnot, this car is one of those exceptions. This car is actually quite reliable if you take care of it properly. With the vast majority of these cars getting up there in age, it really is hard to determine if it's really reliable or not nowadays. It really is up to the owners and how they manage this car. In my opinion, if you really want this car, you should absolutely make sure to check the history, because you never know what happened or how it happened or how the maintenance was. It's just, there's a lot of mystery nowadays with these cars because they're getting up there in age. Simplicity, pretty much the same with reliability. Because this is a C-Class, and back in the day, C-Class is the cheap class. That means that there's really not that much fancy-dancy stuff that's going on here. Aside from the computers on the ECU and whatnot, that's pretty much what you have to worry about. Everything here is simple, nothing to be concerned of that you really have to worry about. The only thing you have to worry about is maintaining it properly, especially if you get the rear-wheel drive. You don't have to worry about the 4MATIC all-wheel drive system. The simpler the car is, the better it is for reliability. And this is one of those cars that is just the right amount of reliability because it's so simple. The C350 is supposed to compete with the 335 BMW, but we all know that this car is way slower out of the league of the 335. The 335 is just a lot more driver focused, but that doesn't mean that this car doesn't handle well or this car isn't up there when it comes to cornering abilities and whatnot. This car with the sport suspension really handles the corners well, and especially with the Michelin Pilot Sport tires that I have here, with being rear-wheel drive, it just screams cornering ability. In my opinion, this is as good as it gets for Mercedes back in the day. Mercedes are really well known for their big hunky S-classes, and this is one of those exceptions. Sure, it won't feel like a BMW, but hey, this is as best as you can get if you want to get a good handling vehicle. Now cons. There's actually a decent amount of cons for this car, especially for me long-term driving this car. I definitely notice a lot of cons when it comes to driving. Now let's start with the first thing with this car. This car is one of those cars that is in the mid-2000s, and that means plastic fantastic. Plastic fantastic just means there's a lot of plastic in the interior, and that means it's not really good. With being Chrysler and Daimler back in the early 2000s, this car is full of plastic, especially the base version. And you know what plastic means when it comes to a decade old of aging? They just break out of nowhere. And that literally does happen. One of the little things that this car just out of nowhere broke was my headrest. The headrest is made out of plastic and it just completely snapped. Another thing is the window switches just peeling off. Even the W203 doesn't do that, and I have that car. And it's way older than this car. Whatever plastic soft touch button it has, it's just warning out. And I don't think that's really acceptable for Mercedes. Anyway, moving on. Because this car has a 3.5 liter V6, That means that it doesn't really shine when it comes to fuel economy. I honestly just average about 20 to 27 miles per gallon. The highest I got through this car is actually 33 miles per gallon, which is not bad, especially for a V6. But if you do a lot of city driving, it's really not a good choice when it comes to fuel economy, because there was already a 2-liter turbo from Audi and 6 cylinders from BMW, which have turbochargers. So this car is actually a lot better when it comes to reliability, but when it comes to fuel economy, not so much. But it's a good cost. It's a win-win, you know, there's always a drawback for an upside. Now let's talk about aftermarket upgradability with this car. There's a lot of aftermarket when it comes to cosmetics. However, when it comes to performance, you can get a C63 AMG for that. That's the biggest reason why I wouldn't even consider upgrading this car. But to my surprise, there's really absolutely little to no option, at least here in the States, when it comes to upgrading this car, like the headers, exhaust, whatnot. And even if you do have the option to upgrade it, it's so expensive. You know, the price to performance when it comes to upgradability with this car is just non-existent. It doesn't make sense. Unless you really love the car and you really have some kind of sentimental value to it, I would absolutely recommend just buying a C63 AMG. Certainly, but not the least, is how expensive it is to maintain. Now, we all know that German cars are very expensive to maintain, and this is no exception. Sure, it might be reliable, and it might be good old Mercedes V6 naturally aspirated engine under this hood, but that doesn't mean that maintenance is cheap. It's still gonna be expensive, especially with labor. So if you ever are considering buying this type of car, buying this W204 Mercedes, I absolutely recommend some kind of warranty, or if you're able to do it with your hands, do some labor work yourself, because it will save you thousands of dollars. Especially with these cars aging and getting up there in age, I absolutely recommend just doing everything yourself, because it will save you time, it will save you money, and it will absolutely save your fucking ass from being broke. Other than that, this car is fantastic. Sure, I already complained about the plastic fantastic on the inside, but that's because this car is mostly a base version. If you have the upgraded version with the leather seats and whatnot, you won't have to really worry about MB text tearing apart on your seat or any little things that go bad. But after all, this car is more than a decade old, and it's surprising to say every car will always break something after a few years old. And the older it gets, the more problems it has. But in conclusion, this car is really fantastic. For under 15 grand, you really could get a lot of things for your money, especially with this car. Just make sure the maintenance is proper, service history is good, and just make sure that you know what you're getting into. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. See you guys in the next video.